We are very excited to embark today on a very new adventure for Learning Ventures, and that is a webinar series. All about the webinar series is all about the future organisation. And this project actually started probably 5 or 6 years ago. What prompted this series was that I was just observing the inertia in organisations to consider more empowerment and team-based organisational designs. Now, we know they are more efficient, they're empowered, they drive better engagement, but organisations just couldn't seem to shift either their thinking or the transformation. And so that's what's kind of prompted some of the thinking that we're having. Look, we've been rolling out award-winning leadership development and culture change programs for years, and despite all of the great work that we do, we send people back into organisations that are static and don't necessarily support all of the adaptive and empowered leadership practices that make up great cultures. And most of these stuck organisations are hierarchies. So look, we've known for over 30 years that team-based organisations are the most effective because they offer speed of decision-making and execution. Hierarchies are actually notoriously slow decision-makers because of their approval chains, and team-based cultures seem to collapse these cycle times. Team-based organisations offer higher accountability and ownership because the teams own the outcomes, not just the tasks. And they have greater adaptability and change readiness. The World Economic Forum says that network team-based organisations are significantly more resilient to disruption. So, look, I got really interested in best practice organisation design, and my first implementation of self-managed teams was way back in the 1990s, and I'm now actually making it my personal mission to educate and coach organisations to be brave and implement team-based organisation designs. And this is really returning me to my management consulting roots, and it's actually the future for all of us. So look, now that I think most people have joined us, please introduce yourself. I'm happy to introduce yourself in the chat. Keep the chat going amongst yourselves. It always makes the webinar much richer. Let me introduce myself. My name is Evelyn Muhlenberg, and I'm the Managing Director and Chief Cheerleader here at Learning Ventures, and today I am on Gadigal land. We acknowledge, just a second, I have to, sorry. I apologise for that. We are testing a new recording system and I just needed to press record. I was just reminded. So look, I'm a veteran of lived experiences in the world, and that's what I've put on the side there. Look, we've had a lot of philosophical conversations lately about human value and where humans can value add in the age of AI. And I've landed on the concept that AI is only as good as the lived experience of the human that is using it. Otherwise, it loses all of its emotions and it loses interpretation, context, judgment, and on many occasions, the spark of creativity that can happen when humans are having philosophical conversations. So, look, I'm a veteran of that. I love my work, and actually I'm thoroughly enjoying the juxtaposition that we are in at the moment, which is the opportunity AI offers clashing with the opportunity as humans to actually find our place in that. Now, Karen is helping me today, and Karen and I will look after the chat. Hello, Karen, another Karen from the Central Coast in Australia. We'll be no more than 45 minutes. We pretty much always stick to time. There's plenty of opportunities for you to comment in the chat. Kate, it's a day of K's. Karen and Kate, look, there is a couple of polls in there. There is a survey in the end. Keep the chat flowing. And if anyone is interested in on-demand webinars, let us know because we have both video and audio. Okay, so more on that all later. Most people who are regulars to our webinars will know that they're always brought to you by one of our 3 strategic pillars. Our 3 strategic pillars are challenging conventional thinking, We know that leadership shapes the success of organisations, and we like to deliver results that last. Today and the next three webinars are all brought to you about challenging your thinking, and I hope and intend to do so. So welcome to the Future Organisation webinar series. Now, most organisations aren't failing, and not all organisations are failing, but most aren't failing because of their strategy. They're actually failing because their organisation can't execute it. We're entering a very new era of work. AI is accelerating change, talent is shifting, and the hierarchy is just slowing everything down. Yet most organisations are still structured for control, not speed. And that's why we've created this Future Organisation webinar series. There are 3 sessions. The dates are there. If you're interested in any of the other sessions, just let us know. First of all, and that's today's session, we need to diagnose our readiness for change. And that insight will help us design the right structure for our organisation. And thirdly, obviously, we need to deliver a blueprint that actually executes on that strategy. Now, all of our webinars are not just going to be theory. They're practical, proven, and built for leaders who want results now. So look, if your organisation needs to move faster, collaborate better, and deliver more with less, the series is for you. So welcome to the first in the series, Diagnosing Your Readiness for Change. And what we're going to cover today is, look, why do we need to shift away from our hierarchies and why now? Some of the dimensions of readiness that can help us scale in our change, and it's any change. What we're going to be focusing on is team-based organisational designs and structures, but it's actually the readiness dimensions could be for any transformation. And how do we assess readiness? It's not as easy as you think and can actually be a real change inhibitor if we don't get things right. So first of all, why do we need to shift at all? The hierarchy is comfortable. Why do we need to shift and why now? What's the burning platform? So let's talk about AI, and I'm sure you're sick of hearing every webinar talk about it. But we've got to talk about AI and automation because Gartner's latest paper to say CHROs, anyway, Chief People Officers, Gartner's latest paper is titled, How Will AI Change Your Organisation Design? And I'm really grateful that a lot of organisations or consulting organisations and papers are starting to focus on what is the impact of AI, not just on the people, but actually the design of the organisation. The key point is that technology, which is accelerating towards all of our organisations, will have a profound effect on our business models. In fact, it already has. Work is being reshaped, and the slow-paced, incremental nature of how we have been implementing change for decades has not actually changed the way we organise work. Might have taken steps out, but it hasn't actually changed the role that people are in. So currently, the average is about that AI will take away about 10 to 20% of the work can easily be done by AI. And this is about the percentage that we're starting to see in terms of adoption. However, in reality, AI could actually do up to 60% of barely administrative type roles. Now, how long before it is in organisations or how long before the pressure is there for us to adopt to this change? Now, we'll dramatically now need to reorganise how work is done. We've got to jettison the repetitive tasks to technology agents, and we actually have to reshape where we add human value. That will reshape how we organise ourselves and how our teams work. Now, the average organisation today has about 6 layers of decision-making, and I'm going to ask a question later on how many layers you've got. But Gartner predicts that in the next 2 years, only 2 years, that'll shrink to 4, by 2030 to max 3. It's happening. Just like the work from home flexibility after COVID, we cannot actually stop the tide. But there's more than just AI which is squeezing. Generation Y and Z are rejecting the hierarchy and the control that our organisations have. They want autonomy. They have AI fluency, which is now becoming table stakes for the skills required in organisations rather than what used to be technical expertise. They seem to be rejecting control, and they're over 50 to 60% of our organisations now. They are the future. Throw into that, so we've got AI, we've got generational change, we've got cost control in tough times. Wages in organisations are actually expensive, and in tough times, there's pressure to reduce costs. So for many organisations, the decisions to downsize are already happening, but also for many organisations, that is leading to the remaining people being asked to continually do more with less. I'm actually going to come back to this later because this very haphazard nature of the current downsizing that I see is actually causing fatigue, change fatigue, which will do more harm in the future, and it actually will stifle our capability to change. So we need to redirect this cost control into improving productivity and having greater outcomes. And finally, the need for speed. If we want to achieve ambition, remain competitive, and really achieve all of the goals that we want and more, we've got to be faster at what we're doing. In the words of the change management expert Daryl Conner, who coined the burning platform metaphor back in 1992 with his book Managing at the Speed of Change, we've got a burning platform at the moment. We have no choice. Organisations need to change or become obsolete because they are so expensive to run. But there is an issue in this statement. Most of the change management frameworks and the philosophies of the past are less valid, because our world isn't the same as it was when Daryl Conner coined this phrase. Change can no longer be a strategic goal we work towards. Now we need a change-ready organisation that can iteratively change and flex adaptably and constantly to what is being the disruption that's coming our way. And there's a second critical issue here. Okay, change. Change to what? What will deliver on all of these outcomes that are now critical to us? It is a team-based organisation. That is the organisational design structure that we need to shift to. Now, maybe that shift is to a hardwired matrix. What about a soft-wired matrix? Cell-based teams, networks of teams, chain-based teams, which are in a line, circle-based teams, self-directed teams, micro-enterprises, clusters of teams, flat teams. Look, there are as many team-based structures as there are organisations. And that's actually going to be the focus of our next webinar in the series, what design is right for your organisation now. Suffice it to say that it will be based around more autonomous teams, because that is the most effective organisational design for speed and productivity and the future organisation. Now, why would we say that? Because it empowers people to make decisions close to where the work is done. It allows teams of people to focus. It allows the teams to actually focus on autonomy and outcomes. It enhances those factors which are key intrinsic motivators in all humans, but especially our generation Ys and Zs. It allows them effective autonomy, mastery and purpose for their own destiny and their own outcomes. And as a result of that, it significantly increases productivity, performance, outcomes, engagement, customer experience. It improves almost all measures. Now, team-based organisational structures have actually been around for 40 years. I was implementing self-managed work teams at Colgate back in the 1990s, and the evidence was there then about the productivity and engagement improvements. And I've been advocating for team-based organisation structures for over 30 years, but why are many organisations still structured as hierarchies? Well, they retain hierarchical structures rather than shifting to team-based ones because hierarchies are known to provide stability, compliance, and clear accountability, which in stable environments is what's needed to scale. It's about control. They are controlling structures. However, this is based on theories from the workflow designer of the hierarchy, Taylor. That's over 100 years old. The world was predictable and stable. It was probably more predictable and stable 20 years ago than it is now. The most successful organisations these days are some hybrid of a team-based organisation. So let's find out where you are on a team-based continuum. Let's open with a poll. Let's get some input from all of you. Karen's going to load the poll up on screen. So what's your current organisational structure? Work's organised in functional pillars, multiple layers. Decisions are pushed up the hierarchy. What about work? Teams primarily operate within functions, but there are some clustered teams, cross-functional projects. Decision-making still mostly sits with leaders. I was actually talking to a client the other day and she had no discretionary spend at all. She actually needed to propose everything to her leader. So it's still quite prevalent. Thirdly, we've got form cross-functional teams or matrices for key initiatives and outcomes, but roles, ownerships, and ways of working are still functional. Progress often depends on strong leadership and strong individuals in the team. Fourthly, on the continuum, work is largely derived through clearly defined cross-functional teams, shared accountability. These teams have some autonomy, but alignment and prioritisation still requires some senior strategy and direction. And finally, we've got our fluid teams that are formed around priorities. And this is that self-managed or semi-autonomous work teams. People move in teams based on skill and demand with high autonomy, fast decision-making. Okay, so let's have a look at what we have here. There's still a few more of you that are answering, so I'll let you answer because there's actually a lot to read in there. So we've got functional with clusters, we've got some cross-functional, more focused cross-functional with more autonomy, and then we have fluid. Now, by all means, start popping some comments in the chat if you wish. I think what I'll do at this stage is I will end the poll and we will show the results for everyone. So at this stage, what we have is about 70% are still a hierarchy. Most organisations actually sit in the bell curve really as having some clusters in their hierarchy. There are some organisations, if we look at it, that are really starting to move to cross-functional autonomy. Fewer still have shared accountability, and I think we have one team that's a fluid organisation. Thank you very much for answering that poll. So it gives me a little bit more detail as to what we're looking at as we go through. So look, if we're looking to shift and even shift one more layer across, because that's often what we're going to do, our organisation may or may not be ready to shift all the way to fluid teams. So if we're going to shift, what are some of the dimensions that are required to be in our organisation in order to make that shift successful? And in today's world, it's not just about willingness to change or even the direction we want to change, which is often top-down. That might have worked years ago, but no more. Without an organisation that is ready to move to a fully team-based structure, the transition will be semi-effective, if not a failure. Just as I mentioned earlier, if we don't change the system, no new organisational design or structure will work. It will just be a team-based organisation or words only, not in effectiveness and outcomes. So let's have a look at what some of those dimensions are. No surprise with the first one, it is dynamic leadership, and it's critical to success in a transformation. Now, leadership matters, both in alignment and in commitment. So leadership alignment is reasonably straightforward. Leaders need to believe and their goals need to align to the strategy. It's all got to make sense. However, it's actually shifted in terms of commitment as well. But if we look at leadership, dynamic leadership skills, Forbes magazine quoted recently that one organisation spent $50 million on the technology and less than 100,000 on the employees in their transformation. So I was chatting to a client the other day who was doing exactly that. Their leadership budget was being squeezed because the tech budget was ballooning. To be successful in transformation, leaders at all levels need to be actively driving the change and demonstrate strong, visible support for the team-based initiative. This builds trust and engagement and helps everyone embrace the change. These leaders are seen as multipliers. However, what we often see now in these hierarchies, even if they have clusters of teams within the hierarchy, we see these middle managers hanging on to control. They're fearing that their role is redundant. And so we've got to start helping them understand that they have a valuable role to play in whether it's sparking AI or leading multifaceted project teams, but demonstrating that leadership. But also there's a difference when we shift to team-based organisations. Top-down leadership and cascading role modelling works in hierarchies, but it doesn't necessarily work when we shift to autonomous team-based. For success in team-based transformation, we need leadership at all levels, democratise leadership. And when you implement the transformation and the new organisation design, you need a groundswell of energy also from within the organisation. So whilst leadership is for everyone in terms of accountability and decision-making, senior and middle leaders need to be empowering coaches. So that role for those middle managers is to be coaches, to spark, encourage and support the effective implementation of AI, new work process, new systems, all of these sorts of things. So great leadership in changing organisations is to empowering people to make decisions close to where the work is done, to truly coach. That's the key. It's a real leader as coach role. I've got a great example at the moment of an executive team we are developing at the moment on a 6-month program. 2 things we're looking at only: coaching and building talent in the succession plan. That's it. The coaching is working, is the catalyst we're using to implement the coaching is the succession plan. It's an executive team program to make them coaches of their organisations. Leaders, good leaders in the dynamic organisation need to spark AI integration, need to build entrepreneurism, and they need to coach transformation. As this is our business, I could present for ages and give loads of examples on successes and failures. Leaders do need these dynamic skills. We've actually done, in February this year, a whole webinar on it. So if you're interested, just let us know in the chat, let Karen know, and we can send you a link. Dynamic leadership is now a critical readiness success factor. If we don't have dynamic leadership, we are not going to be able to coach these teams to be successful. So if we democratise the leadership, we also need the groundswell. So another readiness factor. Skill-based organisations actually see skills as the key organisational pillar of their culture, not just a job role. So leaders and team members are empowered to refine their skills, engage in new projects and expand their skill set. So leaders in hierarchical organisations are often very proprietary about their resources and their power. This ownership of resources needs to be dismantled, and people with the skills need to be recognised. This is the greatest cultural shift for organisations, the dismantling of the power structures that have existed since time began. So the two key considerations here are accountability and governance. These are our baseline skills in readiness for a team-based culture. However, according to Gartner, leaders are really struggling with activating this culture of accountability. And less than 1 in 4 of our team members report high levels of embedded empowerment, meaning we haven't got a strong enough focus on this, or our leaders are too controlling and not empowering and letting go. We need to get these basics right first. Organisations can start with everyone having the World Economic Forum baseline skills for 2026. Great place to start. They are problem-solving skills such as analytical skills, innovation, complex problem-solving, critical thinking, creativity, reasoning, ideation. Self-management, self-leadership is a baseline skill. Learning, resilience, stress management, flexibility and adaptability, including accountability and ownership. If somebody empowers me, I'm going to take it on. This is the democratized leadership skills. Digital skills, key, AI fluency, understanding the technology and what it can do. And of course, working with people, which is self-leadership, social influence, collaboration. So my tip is that without a receptive culture, you will struggle. There needs to be a groundswell for change. So there is leadership readiness and there is team readiness, both with AI fluency. And that is not just the large language models and search, but AI fluency to build agents that will tackle some of our workflows. AI fluency is also about meshing our AI responses with our lived experience to drive better prompts and probing, and therefore more nuanced AI responses. Before we get to the next readiness dimension, there is a little more I would like to add to our AI fluency, and this is where there is a balance. So while AI has the power to supercharge our employee capabilities in unimaginable ways, it can also weaken critical thinking. That's why up top, problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, reasoning, all of those things need to be developed, embedded and refined and reminded in organisations. Otherwise, we will lose it. If we lose our critical thinking or our curiosity that comes from our wisdom and our experiences, and we take AI at face value, we'll be diminishing the possibilities. So leadership readiness, team readiness, AI fluency. Okay, this is just huge. Now, interestingly enough, if we have great leadership, it will create room for psychological safety. If we have great teams, they'll jump into the safe space. But we've just done a quick survey of 10 organisations, and whilst leadership and team-based readiness might be mid-range, psychological safety is still weak. Generation Y and Z are largely educated in environments that encourage expression, participation, questioning authority, and being emotionally open. Yet, our organisations still operate with deeply embedded industrial era power dynamics. That hierarchy, that risk aversion, that political filtering. Which of your organisations has politics playing out? That will not help psychological safety. And there's often implicit punishment for dissent, whether that's reputation, promotion, bonuses, social belonging, future opportunities. That interpersonal risk remains alive in nearly every organisation, regardless of the generational change. So Amy Edmondson, who really describes or is the guru of psychological safety, says it's reducing the perceived cost of interpersonal risk-taking. Readiness factor. If we do not have the capability for interpersonal risk-taking, we will not be successful in any change to a team-based or autonomous organisation. Systems are the backbone of our organisation. So the readiness of our systems to support the new team-based organisation is fundamental. One of my key observations over time is giving enthusiastic leaders life-changing development and sending them back into an unchanged system that stifles their new engagement. So without systems that support HR, performance management, reward and recognition, financial, IT, without systems that support the new ways of working, nothing will actually change. So here's some examples for that. So for HR, you have centralized HR functions, but they can create bottlenecks that slow teams, autonomous teams, down and reinforces that dependency on that centralized system. A great example of something that can be decentralized is recruitment. If process templates and behavioral interviewing skills are in place, the system is ready. And if, as an example, an augmented process can do some of the shortlisting, recruitment could be decentralized to teams. However, that doesn't take away the centralized center of excellence as providing what are some of these processes so that they can be a disciplined implementation in the team. Things like performance management, individual performance metrics reward personal achievement over team outcomes. That can discourage collaboration. Incentive schemes can favour individual stars and leadership visibility. Reward and recognition often rewards visibility. Interesting. So people that don't necessarily like the limelight don't necessarily get seen. It has to be more egalitarian. Things like financial, budgeting and profit and loss ownership sit usually at senior levels, limiting teams' ability to make fast, commercially informed decisions. The democratisation of information. IT, rigid, centrally controlled systems restrict teams' ability to adapt tools, workflows and data access to meet evolving needs. When COVID came in, how many organisations just shut Microsoft Teams? This is all you're using. Teams need to have the autonomy within the governance guidelines to make decisions for their own, so that they are in control of their own effectiveness. They have agencies. And organised systems must change as part of this transformation. It's always a governance balancing act between the system change. But if we don't change the system and we're trying to get a team-based organisation in, like a rubber band, it's just going to flick back and revert to what's comfortable. So we must look at the systems, the organisation and the system. Okay, decision-making. Key success factor here. If we're going to empower people to make decisions closer to the customer, peer or partner, then everyone needs good decision-making practices. It goes without saying, all of this in a psychological safe environment. Okay, try this quick quiz. Over to you, Karen. So, how many levels within your organisation of escalation does it take to spend $2,000? Quick answer here. No, I make the decision. 1 level, 2 levels, 3, 4 or more. What's it look like? Quick decision. I'll give you a moment. Okay, it looks like it stopped. Let's show the results. Well, there you go. Some at 1, a little bit like what we saw in the organisational structure, but for some of you, there are still 2, 3, or more than 4 levels. Thank you for having a bit of fun there in terms of how many levels it takes. Let's talk decision-making. So the reason why I asked is because the $2,000 figure actually relates to a very famous empowerment and decision-making case study. The US 2000 is a benchmark in hospitality and became widely cited as the Ritz-Carlton rule. And here you go. There is the Ritz-Carlton in New York. And what they did was they empowered every employee, including housekeeping and front desk, to spend or could spend up to $2,000 per guest per incident without manager approval to create a memorable recovery or resolve a guest issue. Now, in the end, it was symbolism of the rule. That mattered more than the amount because the benefits were eliminating escalation and delays, empowering people with discretion, and it actually signalled that they trusted their people. In practice, the rule cost very little. Complimentary breakfast here, waiving a minibar cost, maybe transport to the airport, moving a room, some sort of a partial refund. The average recovery was around $100. These days, hospitality recoveries are usually handled by loyalty points. But that said, the Ritz-Carlton example is an organisational design benchmark. Could empowering the person closest to the guest to make the decision reduce escalations, guest pain, frustration, delays? Yes. If it takes more than 1 or 2 approvals to resolve issues, the escalation is costing you more than the solution. So for those organisations that had more than one level that was there for the $2,000, it's costing you more than empowering your people and giving them the skills and decision-making skills to make that decision or to make that judgment. Okay, so in order to fly, we need readiness in leadership, teams, AI adoption, psych safety, plus our systems need to have democratized information in them. Our systems need to be aligned to team-based working, and we need to have the skills to make decisions. If you're going to give us, empower us, we need to have those skills and information. But wait, there is one more. So we've been asking our organisations to change, transform, shift, do this, do that for years. People are tired. Change fatigue and burnout are real issues now, and they mean more to our adaptability and capability to change than we actually think. So Dr. John Chan, who won the RE Scholarship, which is the Human Resources Institute Scholarship last year, is quoted from an April article as change fatigue leads to, 1, exhaustion, which depletes our cognitive and emotional reserves. What that also leads to is sick days, all sorts of issues in terms of our HR metrics. It leads to cynicism. We will see this playing out in our engagement surveys, another HR metric. And all of the Gallup research talks about quiet quitting, disengagement. This is cynicism. But cynicism also leads to detachment and poor culture and outcomes. And finally, change fatigue reduces professional efficacy. We lose sight of what matters, our purpose, one of our key intrinsic motivators. Lots has caused this change fatigue. However, if we don't deal with it, we're not going to change. So how does this play out? So change fatigue is caused by the constant fire hose of change that we're aiming at people. Well, their workload, more with less, control, fairness. What I think is interesting is that there are now links between organisational change fatigue and burnout and depression. And whilst in the current world, that's perceived as an individual person problem, it's actually an organisational design problem and a collective issue for our organisations. And to that point, the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Commission, has been running a series of podcasts and articles about it. And the implications for our workplaces are quite serious. If the Fair Work Commission now recognises poor change management and the burnout and fatigue that comes from it as a workplace hazard, we need to be much more conscious of the impact. If these are usually organisation design problems, then we need to stop and fix the design of our organisations to at least stop or reduce some of that fatigue. So that is a lot of things that we need to be perfect at. Organisation design is called hard change because it is not linear and it is not easy change. Hard change is like installing a complete new operating system. So we need to think about, how do we give people in the organisation the agency they need to move through the transformation and actually are able to make some of those decisions themselves. That agency is pretty important, and it's not then thrust upon them. What we should do is first maximise the agency we give our people, so that we avoid compounding that fatigue resistance, which is likely to make any of our shifts close to failures, or at least reduce the outputs or outcomes. So how do we measure readiness for change? Readiness for change can be assessed by evaluating an organisation's capability or capacity across all of these key dimensions. This typically combines quantitative data, surveys, performance metrics, with qualitative insights, interviews and workshops to identify both our strengths and our barriers to successful change. I'd ask the question, though, before we embark on change, how many organisations actually assess their readiness? In 2026, we can no longer just treat willingness as our willingness. We can treat readiness as our willingness to change. We actually need to measure our multi-level capability, which includes all these contemporary workplace issues, such as AI adoption and change fatigue. Current available scans from many major consulting organisations look mostly at leadership sponsorship and team-based skills in there. Energy for change and empowerment, those sorts of things. And whilst culture is important, again, it is not uniformly a predictor of success. Without a singular change focused to resolve change fatigue, progressive AI adoption, along with leadership, psych safety, team-based culture, and the systems to support it, very little in our organisations is going to move. So some current scans I've seen are adding AI fluencies. Again, this is a must measure, not optimal anymore. But I've not seen any one readiness scan that's actually looking at change fatigue. And as it happens, this is what we're working on at the moment: a readiness assessment for the future workplace, an assessment or audit that looks at all of these readiness dimensions. Now, it's actually in beta test, launches on the 1st of July, and that's kind of what we're taking you through in terms of this series. But for example, we're already starting to see some results. In beta test partners, AI fluency and readiness is totally inconsistent over our 10 partners. So that would suggest that we need to actually have more comprehensive programs of AI fluency for team members and AI coaching and leadership for our leaders. So knowing that readiness, if we know what our organisation is capable of now, we are much more informed about what we need to do first, second, or third. And that actually lends itself to the next webinar, which is what organisation design of all of those team structures is right for you now. No point in shifting to self-managed teams if your HR, IT, and finance systems are not open and not able to support the need for information. Perhaps, if that's the case, it's best to move to clusters within the hierarchy to allow time for those systems to shift and the information to become more ubiquitous. It also allows time for us to actually improve and upskill what I call a human capability engine, which is all our people that are in there. If we know what your readiness is, you are much more informed to decide what design will work for you now and in the next few years. With a higher readiness across these pillars, you could actually be bold. With weaker readiness, perhaps some foundations need to be put in place first, and a more modest or conservative team-based design, such as a clustered hierarchy, is your best option. So readiness, pretty critical, which will guide you into the next part of our webinar series, which is readiness will decide what design is the right structure for our organisation now as we go through. So here's our webinar series. They're the dates. If you want a link, Karen has put a link in for the next webinar if you're interested in the next stage of our process. I'm conscious of our time. So we need to shift away from hierarchies. Why now? Because hierarchies are stifling our ability to move at speed. There are many dimensions of readiness that can help us scale our organisations: leadership, team culture and capability, change fatigue, psychological safety, systems and governance, as well as us looking at our decision making. And how to assess readiness? Well, it's not as easy as you think, but it's actually a change inhibitor. So we need to assess our readiness first before we move. Karen has already put a poll up about feedback. We love your feedback because it helps us design much better webinars going forward, albeit that these three are kind of already designed. But I will ask the question, are you ready for the future organisation? And do you have an idea or an understanding of your organisation's readiness for the future as we go through? By all means, put in some topics that we can start to look at the end of the year. And thank you very much for attending. See you later.